We'll go to Terry Schultz, NPR.
Mr. Secretary General, Terry Schultz with NPR and CBS. Looking ahead to tomorrow, where you will hear from General Dunford and talk about your capabilities in Afghanistan, do you get the sense that allies have been eased, that their impatience has been eased somewhat by the Kerry Karzai talks in Kabul, even though this means the Loya Jirga will not make this decision on jurisdiction until the end of November, upon which NATO's own SOFA is dependent? And are you confident that Afghanistan will come through on this and agree to the U.S. demands? Thanks. And what happens if not? I mean, we still face the possible zero option. Thanks.
Of course, in political processes, you never know what might be the outcome. But you ask me if I'm confident, and I have to say, yes, I am confident that we will conclude security agreements with Afghanistan, a bilateral security agreement between the US and Afghanistan, and, as far as NATO is concerned, a so-called status of forces agreement. I'm confident that we will reach agreement because the Afghans know that such agreements are a prerequisite for our deployment of trainers after 2014. We stand ready to train, advise, assist the Afghan security forces, but of course we need a proper legal framework, in this case a status of forces agreement that covers NATO deployment to Afghanistan. And I do believe that the Afghans would like to see us continue training, advising, assisting the Afghan security forces, and this is a reason why I'm confident that we will also reach a conclusion.
Turkish media over here.
Yes. Secretary General, two questions. There were concerns from the NATO side on the Chinese missile system that Turkey is willing to make an agreement to have from the Chinese government. What kind of arguments did you had in the meetings to persuade Turkey, and did those arguments include any of these arguments were about the transformation of technology could be done from an allied country that can be given to Turkey, not from China, but from any allied country? And my second question would be, wouldn't it be also a point of advantage to have actually Chinese systems by Turkey so that NATO can see what Chinese systems look like? Thank you.
First of all, let me stress that we have not, and I stress we have not discussed this issue in the meetings this afternoon. Our position is very clear. It is a national decision to decide which equipment to purchase. It remains a national decision. However, seen from a NATO perspective, of course, it is of utmost importance that the systems nations plan to acquire can work and operate together with similar systems in other allied nations. That's what we call interoperability. Of course, that is of utmost importance, and I feel confident that Turkey is aware of this NATO position. I'm also confident that Turkish authorities will take that into account before taking the final decision, and I understand that no final decision has been made yet.
My second question, do you see it as an opportunity to see the Chinese systems?
I'm not a technical expert. I don't know anything about the technical configuration of Chinese systems. And as I said, it is a national decision, but of course from a NATO perspective it is of utmost importance that systems nations acquire can work and operate together with systems in other allied nations.
I had, Polish radio in the front row.
Wojciech Cegielski, Polish Radio. Secretary General, I would like to ask about the steadfast jest exercises which will be held next month in Poland. I know that you will be observing the exercises in Poland. So what's your assessment, what's your expectation on the exercises? And tomorrow, while the NATO-Russia Council, will the question of these exercises, steadfast jest, will be raised by you or the partners?
In which meetings?
Tomorrow on the
Yeah,
NATO-Russia
tomorrow.
Council.
Yeah, okay, yes. First of all, I look very much forward to the steadfast yes exercise. Actually, I see that exercise as one example of what I would call future NATO. Future NATO is a NATO that stays prepared for all eventualities, and to ensure that we are prepared, we need to make sure that our forces can work and operate and communicate together. And that's actually the purpose of the steadfast yes exercise. The purpose of the exercise is to test and certify the NATO response force. As you know, the NATO response force is a rapid reaction force with the aim to defend any ally, deploy anywhere, and address all kinds of threats. And we need to make sure that the NATO response force is fit for purpose, and that's actually the exact purpose of the steadfast yes exercise. I would expect military exercises to be one of the topics to be discussed in the NATO-Russia Council meeting tomorrow, because in my introduction I will invite ministers to discuss transparency, because I think full transparency is of utmost importance. The problem is not military exercises. I mean, militaries do exercise. But the problem is if there is a lack of transparency, so that misperceptions and misunderstandings are created. The best way to prevent such misperceptions and misunderstandings is to provide full transparency. In that respect, I appreciate that NATO observers were invited to observe the Zapad 13 exercise, and similarly we have invited Russian observers to observe the steadfast yes exercise. These are important steps forward, and I think we will discuss that in the meeting tomorrow also with a view to possibly improve transparency in the future.
Well, I'll take Reuters in the front.
Sabine Siebold with Reuters. Mr. Secretary General, could you tell us what reception the German proposal for a framework nation concept got in the ministerial, and if there were any decisions taken?
I heard of a lot of appreciation for the German proposal. We had a very constructive discussion on that. I see the German proposal as one of several avenues to ensure that we can acquire the necessary military capabilities in the future. Basically, the framework nation concept is about more multilateral cooperation, for instance, in the acquisition of or development of military capabilities. And as you know, I'm a strong believer in such multilateral cooperation. Actually, I see it as an element in the overall smart defense concept. So we had a very constructive discussion, and ministers agreed that we should continue to work on this project, explore a number of issues further, and then we will revert to the issue next time defense ministers meet.
One very last question, Europa Press.
Thank you, Secretary General. Will Spain and Portugal in the end host the big live exercise for 2015? And do you see the steadfast exercise a bit as, as a starter for the big exercise that's supposed to come in 2015 to test the NATO response force? Thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, Spain, Portugal, and Italy have offered to host the 2015 live exercise. I welcome that. I'm very grateful for that offer, and in today's meeting, a lot of appreciation was expressed. And I see these exercises, the 2015 exercise, as well as the Steadfast DIAS exercise, as examples of what we call the Connected Forces initiative, because it is about joint exercises, training, education, to make sure that our armed forces can work and operate together in the future. We learned that in Afghanistan, and as we draw down in Afghanistan, we will step up exercises, training, education, and the exercise concept we have approved today is just an example of that.
Many thanks indeed. Good evening, and we'll see you early tomorrow morning. Thank you.